Since I was a teenager, I have been obsessed with trying to get my arms around what sort of thing life is. I was raised the son of a fundamentalist evangelist, no less. And as I was a teenager, I came across what you might call a forbidden book. It was by John von Neumann, there in the Jackson Public Library, and it was entitled The Theory of Self-Reproducing Automata. That was the first encounter I had ever had with the idea of a truly mechanistic vision of something like life. I found it almost incomprehensible, but if you stayed with it, you found passages that you could understand and you could grasp the overall thrust of it. And above all, you could see his patterns of reasoning. They were grandiose by modern standards, but he had such a great mind that he could talk in large generalities without losing his way. And so, since I was a teenager, I was fascinated with von Neumann's theory of self-reproducing automata, which I later came to understand was based in part on a lecture that the great physicist Erwin Schrödinger had given about 6 or 7 years earlier in Ireland in 1943, called What is Life? And in that great lecture, Schrödinger speculated on what could be causing what we see in physical inheritance. Now, as you know, the study of inheritance started with Mendel, but his ideas were so outlandish, those algebraic ratios he found in inheritance, that his superiors burned his works. And it took another 50 years to rediscover genetics and to bring it into the modern age by a much more sophisticated study. But even by the 40s, there was still no comprehension whatever of what could be producing these assortments that were seen in inheritance. And there in 43, in that great lecture to the packed house, Erwin Schrödinger said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence clearly points to the existence of a code, a physical code, actually embodied in a molecule in the living cell. Well, he then began to speculate that this code must somehow specify all the specific traits of the body, indeed all the specific structures of the body in detail. And it must somehow be modifiable so as to produce the kind of alterations that we see in successive generations of living organisms. Well, like the ideas of Mendel many years before, the ideas of Schrödinger were so far out that they, for the most part, fell on stony ground, but not for everybody. The smartest scientists knew who Schrödinger was and knew that he was like von Neumann. When he talked, you listened. And what Schrödinger was talking about was a tremendous new objective of science, the discovery of this code. And both Watson and Crick, along with many other great molecular biologists, heard that bugle call. And within 10 years, Watson and Crick had solved the structure of DNA. What is DNA? DNA is an incredibly large molecule. It has billions of atoms. Far, far larger than any, quote, inorganic molecule. It's a very, very special molecule because, as Schrödinger speculated, it does precisely specify every physical piece and part of the organism. Furthermore, our deepening knowledge of molecular biology has led us into a vast storehouse of microengineering, or should I say nanoengineering, these tremendous devices and micro machines and tracks and vehicles and dynamic processes in the living cell. And increasingly it seems that instead of the discovery of DNA having brought us to the precipice of understanding what is life, the answer to the question seems to be receding because we seem to be missing something fundamental. DNA contains templates for every protein and every enzyme in the physical body. DNA contains switches, or I should say code for switches, that can manipulate the expression of DNA, which we are beginning to understand in some detail. But so far, we have no idea of what kind of algorithm might govern the whole operation of the genome. To put it another way, we have no idea of what the biological operating system is. Biological operating system? What are you talking about? Life came into being through the random jostling of molecules, right? No operating system there. We know operating systems do not come into being through the random jostlings of molecules, whatever else they may produce in the way of temporary and potentially temporarily survivable structures. We do not, in our wildest, most astrophysical imaginations, ever suppose that the random jostlings of molecules produce algorithms and things like recursion. We don't assume that. And yet, in living organisms, we have an extraordinary phenomenon. We know we have a code containing billions of atoms, as I mentioned, that produces organisms containing trillions of atoms. Furthermore, these organisms contain many, many articulated subcomponents whose complexity and interoperability we are beginning to grasp. And behind this we see a whole dynamic structure of enormous complexity that was created entirely from these few billion atoms. It created an organization several orders of magnitude larger than itself. And how is this possible? Here's where we come to a nice, simple answer to our chain of inquiry. There is only one method of producing a very complex, especially a complex dynamic system from a concise, compact, linear string like DNA. There's only one way known to do that, and that is through algorithmic recursion. It's the only known way to do it. To produce 2D or 3D complexity from 1D, from a 1D string, like Turing automata or DNA. The only known way of compactly describing a very complex system or dynamic system is through an algorithm to be executed recursively on a Turing machine. It's the only known way. And therefore, we are led by Occam's razor to adopt that explanation because it is the only elegant explanation for how life acquires its 3D dynamic complexity. It is algorithmically driven. There is an operating system yet to be discovered. The information is encoded in a way as yet to be defined and articulated. But therein lies the great secret of life, in the algorithm, not in the genes themselves, which are templates for the physical proteins and enzymes, but do not contain, to the best of our understanding, the operating system.